better get used to me, oh can't stop moving, I can't stop moving, oh got a really good feeling, I got a really good feeling, oh can't stop moving, I can't stop moving. I think I'm starting to realize not everything has to be alright. Just keep your head up and hold on tight. Shake off the dirt and throw it right down the line. Go on, get loose. Yeah, you better get used to me, go get loose. Yeah, you better get used to me, go on, get loose. Yeah, you better get used to me, go get loose. Yeah, you better get used to me, oh can't stop moving, I can't stop moving, oh got a really good feeling, I got a really good feeling, oh can't stop moving, I can't stop moving, oh can't stop moving, I can't stop moving, oh got a really good feeling, I got a really good feeling, oh be alright. Just keep your head up and hold on tight. Shake off the dirt and throw it right down the line. Go on, get loose. Yeah, you better get used to me, used to me. Go get loose. Yeah, you better get used to me. Go on, get loose. Yeah, you better get used to me, used to me. Go get loose. Yeah, you better get used to me. Yo, why? You can't stop moving now. Can't stop
Towards the middle of March 2020, the world began to look and feel a lot different for all of us. Scary and confusing sights and sounds were all around us. Then, the stay-at-home and shelter-in-place orders effectively established a lockdown as we began to see people we cared about around us get sick and in all too many cases die. The reports of Black and Latinx communities disproportionately impacted by COVID-related deaths and infections invaded our consciousness. Mutual aid efforts sprang up in response to these reports, and the reality hit home that millions of people who call America home were out of work, unable to pay their rent and mortgage, incapable of putting food on their tables, or ensuring their children received a quality education. As we were attempting to adjust to the disruption the global pandemic brought to our lives, we sat transfixed to our screens watching George Floyd callously murdered in broad daylight, and the world changed again. Collectively, we awakened to the reality of simultaneous pandemics. Not only was our ability to stay healthy under attack, our capacity for economic security had been compromised. And we also had a front row seat to the pervasive nature of structural racism. The reckoning was upon us. Change wasn't just a coming, it was now here. Community organizing groups across the country were engaging their base to not just meet the needs of their communities, but to create new paradigms by which local and national institutions had to respond. Government, philanthropy, civic groups, corporations, etc., everyone was being ushered into a new world by organizers. The world was introduced to terms like BIPOC and racial equity, and then came the backlash. I'm sure most of us can remember where we were when we received the news that the U.S. Capitol had been breached and blood spilled in the people's house, which wasn't just about the results of an election, but more importantly, about a belief that a way of life was being stolen from those who considered themselves the true patriots. Months removed from these events, we at the Wieboldt Foundation invite you to reflect on what we've seen, heard, and experienced over the last 18 months to bring those lessons forward to shape the future our grandchildren will be born into. Doing what we've been doing for the past 5 decades and coinciding with the Wieboldt Foundation's 100th anniversary, we're here to interrogate how the critical systems we rely upon can better serve our communities. We invite you to join us as we hold conversations to inspire us to change the way forward, centering the experiences of the people most impacted by these issues and framed from the expertise of the organizers who work to address these issues daily. Thank you for being here. And as you watch our panel discussion tonight, please ask yourself what you can do in this moment to get us all a little closer to where we need to be as a nation. Enjoy.
Good evening, my name is Cassie Walker-Burke. I am the Chicago Bureau Chief of Chalkbeat Chicago. And if you don't know Chalkbeat, we're a nonprofit news outlet. We're in 7 different cities and we have a national desk. And we write stories about public education. We launched here in 2018. In fact, one of our early events, we had an event, what should Chicago's next mayor do about public schools, do for public schools? So a lot has happened since we launched. We've been very closely following the pandemic's impact on learning here, the plan for reopening, but we've also written a lot about police in schools and efforts to remove them. We've done a series on literacy. We've also been really closely looking at the pandemic's impact on young men of color. So if you don't know our work, our website's free. We partner with a lot of different media organizations, and so I'm also happy to share my contact information with you at the end. I'm also a mother, and I have children in preschool, in CPS, and also in college. So I'm very interested in systems and how they work or don't work, because I have children in multiple systems. Well, I'm pleased to introduce to you all tonight a very impressive panel. They should speak for themselves, and they will introduce themselves. So maybe we will start tonight with Castro at the very end of our table, if you'll each give about a 1-minute introduction.
Awesome. David Castro, representing the Southwest Organizing Project, a member-based, issue-based organization on the southwest side of the city, primarily in Gage Park and Chicago Lawn. We are composed of 47 member institutions, including churches, schools, local nonprofits, and other meeting spaces for community. Many of the area issues in which we work on include housing, immigration, safety, health, and education. In a second, I'll describe a little more what that looks like. In addition to my work as education organizer, I'm also a PhD candidate at Loyola Chicago, where I research youth activism and the relationship between civics education and the development of organizers activists.
Elizabeth?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Todd Breland. I'm an associate professor of history at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And there, my research is on the history of African American education, the history of Chicago, urban history, and African American history more broadly. And in particular, I've done research on Black organizing by parents, community members, teachers around improving public schooling over the long 20th century and up until more recent times as well. I'm also a member of the Chicago Board of Education, where it's been interesting to see less on the research side and more on the policy side what some of these issues look like from a different perspective. I am also a parent. I have 2 children in Chicago public schools.
G2.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, everybody. I'm G2 Brown. I'm the National Director of the Journey for Justice Alliance. We are an organization of community-based organizations in over 30 cities around the country. We use community organizing to win equity in public education. We recognize that the biggest issue in public education in urban communities across the United States is the unwillingness to provide equity for Black and brown families. And so that's who J4J is. I am a proud son of the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization. Oh, see. All right, and also I'm a Global Fellow for Racial Equity with the Atlantic Institute. That's it.
Joining us tonight also is Catherine. She's joining us remotely. Catherine, can you hear me okay?
Unfortunately, not at the moment.
Unfortunately, not at the moment. Should we come back for an introduction? Okay, great. So we have people online, we have people in the room, we have panelists in the room, and we have a panelist online. So a lot of grace for us all tonight in this room. Well, maybe we'll get back to the question. Is Catherine back? I can't tell. Okay. Okay, so we'll start with our first question tonight. And Castro, I hope you don't mind if we start with you, because I'm hoping we can get a local perspective on this and then maybe look a little bit more broadly at the national perspective. So as we know, COVID put a very stark spotlight on inequities that existed well before the pandemic, and so notably in housing and healthcare, but also education.
Right.
And it also called on schools to transform overnight to meal delivery hubs, vaccination sites, remote learning centers. You know, Castro, for you, what did the pandemic year really reveal to you or crystallize for you?
Right.
And what are you seeing, how are you seeing that play out on the ground now?
Yeah, I really like the framing of the question, because I think one of the things that SWAP has always really prioritized in the work that we do around education is that if we're talking and pushing and driving toward vibrant, equitable education and schooling by way of which our country has never had, by way of which our city has never had, what we need are the dials of all other aspects of public life to also be moving at the same time concurrently. So the idea that housing, that safety, that access to healthcare, whether that be mental or physical, and the nuances in between, and immigration reform. We have always kind of driven to the idea that schools are the meeting places of all of these issues with so much joy, with so much trauma, with so much complexities. The idea that all these other sectors of public life should be moving in this drive of education equity has always been the mode in which we moved. COVID exacerbated and to some degree accelerated already pre-existing inequities around that, particularly as it pertains to the Southwest side. Right, so some of the work that we're doing that we're really proud of, most of our ambitious work, is around, there are 2 amazing organizers, Jessica Biggs and Jasmine Serrano, that are leading both the Southwest System of Care and Chicago's Healthy Equity Zones work, which is bringing together both service providers, organizations, community members, local leaders to collaborate, to think collectively about how can we use the schools to continue to be the meeting spaces of community, both for curricular education and for access to the supports that they need to live healthy lives.
Thank you. Elizabeth, same question for you as somebody who's both studied public education and now had a front row seat to really how it works. What did the pandemic reveal really or crystallize for you about the system's vulnerabilities? And what are you seeing and hearing from students and parents and educators now?
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of the things, just to draw on what Castro already pointed out, the inequities that were exacerbated by COVID certainly existed prior to COVID. And I think one of the things we've seen in terms of schools is also a condition that existed prior to the pandemic and exists now, which is that schools are called to do so much more than just educate children. And when you look at, for example, Chicago Public Schools it's been more than last spring now, hasn't it? Look, since 2020, of March 2020, the tens of millions of meals that were served, right? So they're food providers. They're creating access to healthcare. They're creating, places that people go to link services. And on the one hand, there's an opportunity to then provide such services. But on the other hand, it certainly shows, I think, the broader long-term implications of the fact that in this country we have hollowed out any form of a social safety net that may have existed. And so when you see the financial condition of families and how it was devastated by COVID, and at the same time how things like unemployment, additional funding that's going directly to families makes a profound difference in people's lives. I was looking at something recently that was saying that there is less poverty right now in the United States than there has been for many, many decades. And the reason for that is because direct payments were made to families, right? And so we know that when that social safety net is built back up, there's such potential for what it can achieve. But the fact that it's been so hollowed out for so many years, I think we saw that come to bear. I mean, I guess that's at a macro level. And I'm happy to talk more about later, I think, funding and what there are opportunities to leverage from what we've learned. I think on a more sort of interpersonal basis, we've also seen the long-term struggles that have existed between our public institutions and families, and the lack of trust that exists there, and the ways in which there are opportunities to build that, and also ways in which it's been further fractured by this moment of crisis, prolonged crisis, by the trauma that our families have experienced, and frankly, our teachers, our school leaders, everyone in the system, central office workers, like folks have really been working hard in difficult conditions, and I think people are tired at all levels. And yet there's still a need to continue to persevere, to continue to work on building relationships, and try to reimagine what creating a more robust social safety net for our families and communities, and certainly our schools, might look like.
Thank you. G2, help us with the national perspective on that question.
Yes, ma'am. So I think you see a lot of common links across states. I think in places like Oakland, California, and throughout New Jersey. And remember, in the beginning of the pandemic, New Jersey was sort of the epicenter, right? But there was this resistance to going to a full remote learning, right? And so, same as there was here. We had to actually pressure early on Chicago Public Schools to not push our children into schools too soon. And so I think what you see around the country is what you see in Chicago, and in the core of it is that, there's an old saying that the foundation of any nation are the institutions that lay the structure for the people's development. And you can look at a society's value system based on how its institutions function. Well, what most Americans take for granted, decent schools, grocery stores, right, decent housing, we have to fight, claw, and scratch for every day. Case in point, in the middle of the pandemic, we had to fight to stop the closing of Mercy Hospital. I mean, there were people that would actually close down a hospital when black people are 71% of the deaths, even though we're 31% of the population. That's a belief system in action. That's a belief system that says we don't matter in action. And so for us, I think, as Elizabeth said, there's sort of a culture that's been established before the pandemic that just got uglier now because the need was so much greater. And so, yes, I think schools, there's an opportunity for schools to be that hub that it needs to be in our community, right? And there's an opportunity now, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but to reimagine, because this can't be tinkered. It has to be transformed. It is not working in our communities. We've suffered from over 20 years of blind commitment to school privatization, and the people who make those decisions not being the ones that have to live with the results. Today, 1 out of every 3 people who lived in New Orleans pre-Hurricane Katrina cannot return. Every city where the privatization movement is taking root, every city, the black population has gone down in every city. So are we to believe that it's not an instrument of gentrification, or what we would actually call purging us from American cities? So I think we have to have an honest, blunt assessment of what COVID has revealed and what will our response be. Will we continue to say, well, we're working to eradicate inequity, or will we actually have a zero tolerance policy towards racism instead of a zero tolerance policy towards black and brown children? What about zero tolerance for racism, right? And so it's had a pretty, you see around the country, as Elizabeth said, and I agree 100%, people are tired. People are, yeah, so.
Thank you. Is Catherine back? Is she able to join us at this point? Not at this point. Okay, so we will move on. Just let me know when she's able to join us. Elizabeth, I'm hoping to start with you with this next question, because of your role both studying education and also on the school board. You know, where do you see Chicago Public Schools really poised to make a big difference here? Like, what are you energized by and excited by, and where do you worry? Like, what is the thing that keeps you up at night about where it is falling or might fall short?
I think I will say, like, and I'm thinking particularly there are multiple things that I see as things I am proud of about Chicago Public Schools and bright spots. And I think all of them are places where we see the equity vision of the district actually being enacted and implemented. And I think there are also places where we see the district genuinely working with communities in a way that builds trust. And so a few of those I would highlight would be things like the fact that Chicago Public Schools has an equity framework. The terms of the framework are, I think, extremely solid, right? It says that any decision that's made has to involve inclusive partnerships, and there have to be people with historical memory, those responsible for implementing such things, and those most impacted at the table. Now, actually implementing that and incorporating that in the day-to-day of a huge institution is not something that happens very quickly. And institutional change is hard work. These are long-standing bureaucracies that take a lot to move, but I do think that there is an intent there, and it's the following through at every stage and every space where the work continues. I think programs like Choose to Change and You Are Not Alone, just to give examples, are places where we are providing wraparound supports for some of our young people who are furthest from opportunity. So these are young people often in options or alternative schools who are provided with job opportunities, with mental health supports, with wraparound services. And in the You Are Not Alone, and this as a historian speaks to my heart, the program actually, it's where high school students get paid as part of a summer program, and I think they're looking to continue during the year, to interview long-term CHA residents and elders as part of an oral history project, so that they're actually actively involved in that work. I think if you look at things like the whole school safety committee process, I don't believe that police should be in schools. However, the whole school safety process, whereby community organizations actually did the work of engaging school communities to put together whole school safety committees and then work to enact those whole school safety plans, and again, and as an ongoing process, I think that can be a model for how the district does that kind of community engaged work. I think on the testing side, you talk about privatization. One of the other things that's been a hallmark of the period of privatization is the high stakes testing. And the district is actively moving away from the use of NWEA for high stakes purposes and looking at a different way to actually use assessments that are helping teachers rather than for punitive purposes. And all of those things to me are bright spots. Along, again, like I said before, with the folks who are coming in every day and serving our children, our teachers, our paraprofessionals, our principals, the district staff. I think the two big things, I know this is for later, maybe, but that I look at that are areas that continue to be of concern is the need to build, and I'm not even going to say rebuild because I think this has been a long-standing problem, but to build relational trust. We have massive problems of a lack of relational trust, and that's not something that is rebuilt quickly. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of intensive work so that we are working with communities and really actively rebuilding, or I should say just building that trust. And then the other big concern, I guess, thing that I see on the horizon, again, and I just want to be clear, this is outside of the immediate fires of like COVID safety. So I'm looking at the long-term stuff here, and I'm happy to talk about that as well if it's something you want to talk about. But, you know, the long-term stuff for me, my concerns are around funding. And when in my own historical work, you know, I look at Chicago and all the different things, particularly that Black parents and community members have fought for over time, for desegregation, for community control, for independent Black institutions. More recently, you talk about privatization and this more recent era of school reform. Under all of those was a demand for equitable funding. And even though these other things may have been tried in some piecemeal fashion, providing a fully funded, high-quality education for Black and brown children is something that has never happened, not just here in Chicago, but frankly in the nation. And so as we move forward, and to your point, the continued decline, particularly in Black communities in our population, for a myriad of factors that is not the fault of the people who are leaving the city or being pushed out of the city, we're going to continue to have problems with being able to fully provide the quality education that we know all young people deserve, and that parents and community members have been telling us what they want. I actually think there is very little mystery about what a high quality education looks like, right? People know what they want. It's been a very actually similar chorus for many decades about what a high quality education looks like. But in Chicago public schools and in the state of Illinois, we consistently in Illinois rank at the bottom or near the bottom of state funds for public education. Our schools are funded at something like 60-some-odd% adequacy by the state's own metric. And so how do we provide the things that we know students need as need grows because of the pandemic and other factors, while our population continues to decline? And so I think, to me, figuring out how to more equitably and fully fund and resource our schools to give students the things that we know they need is something in a long-term space that I continue to be very concerned about, and want to think about ways to leverage the moment we're in to do something about.
Castro, from your perspective on the Southwest side and from the neighborhoods and students and parents and families you work with, you know, where do you see the school system doing good, you know, making a difference, making progress, and where do you worry?
Well, where do I worry? No, I'll start with some initiatives that we're working on that I think offer a fertile ground to launch from, which is, I think, one of the largest and more expansive initiatives that we're running is the Parent Mentor Program, which is a partnership with Chicago Public Schools in 23 of our local schools and all throughout the state, to get parents involved in their child's education within the classroom, to support and to have them experience public life, hopefully as a branching off point for other opportunities. One of the things that happened even this past summer, there were two initiatives that we were able to launch in partnership with Chicago Public Schools and the Park District. One, for parent leaders, we were able to host around 70, both English and Spanish sessions, a leadership camp. I remember working with folks from CPS to really design an initiative where we were really honest. We would like to run an organizer training, run an experiment, what a local campaign would look like in your schools, and we were pleasantly surprised when they supported it and thought it was a great idea. We included elements of that around racial healing, around tackling Latino anti-Blackness as it looks on the Southwest side, by addressing it, and to see the support for that type of curriculum in our schools and for it to be supported by CPS was really encouraging, to be really frank. It was a different tone than I think I had experienced in the past. Concurrently, we also ran a vaccine ambassador program with young people, understanding the power of young people to shape and inform their local communities. We both brought on young people as interns to get access to the vaccine, to rental support as SWAP is able to offer it, and to host summer kickbacks in the park, in Marquette Park, where every Friday for 8 weeks, we hosted just fun events, games for them coming together. So I see all these small moments in which there is partnership, a meaningful partnership with local CBOs to shape and design policy and practice. I think we need a whole lot more than that. I think sometimes what often goes unstated when we think about partnerships between CBOs and district or any large institution at a citywide or national level is that our communities are very sensitive, and this is to what Dr. Todd Breland was referencing, are very sensitive to the differences between presence and power. They are very aware of when they have presence in the space and no power. And this district has a long-running history of doing lots of presence, very little power. So I think repairing that relational trust or lack thereof between the community and say the district proper is where we are allowing communities, whether that be parents and young people, to design policy and practice and to really give them the power that they need to shape the institutions in which they embody every single day and build every single day.
G2, when you think about Chicago in the context of some of the other districts you see, as you travel around the country and talk to people around the country, same question for you, but where do you see Chicago sort of stand out in both maybe a good way, and where do you see it way behind, or really going a different direction, something that makes you worry?
I think one of the strengths of Chicago is that you have a long history of membership-based community organizations that a lot of other cities don't have. And these organizations provide the space for residents to identify issues they care about and then to work with, whether it's through pressure or whether it's through partnership with different institutions to make that happen. I think that's a strength of Chicago. Southwest Organizing Project, Brighton Park Neighborhood Council, Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, Virginia Burns Hope Center, Logan Square Neighborhood Association. I can go on and on. I think having someone like Elizabeth, and I'm not just saying this because Elizabeth cool, but have somebody like Elizabeth Todd Breland on the school board is important. If the board is not going to be elected, yes, ma'am. But because I think that speaks to another issue that only in districts that serve primarily black and brown children do you have this lack of democracy. People are not in Oak Park demanding the right to elect their school board. People are not in Cherry Hill, New Jersey demanding the right to elect their school board. I was named after, and this is not a new issue, I was named after a man named G2 Wayusi in Brooklyn, New York, who organized the community control of schools movement in the late 1960s, early 70s in Brooklyn, when communities understood that the people who were making decisions for their children did not have their best interests at heart. So when we talk about what's best for children, you cannot take governance out of it. If we acknowledge the presence of deep structural racism, right, then who protects us from the wolf? Who protects us, right? And so what protects us is democracy. And so I think that's where Chicago suffers, because what districts like to do is to gloss, or what systems like to do is gloss over the harm they've caused, while we live in neighborhoods where there are vacant lots where there used to be houses, where there's schools that are boarded up, and there are families that that now live in Iowa, right? When will our pain be something that we don't have to just get over, but it is front of mind? So I think that in itself is the biggest weakness in Chicago, is Chicago is hyper-segregated, and it's comfortable being so. It's comfortable being so. And so, like, one of the issues in Chicago public schools is that we've lost over 50,000 children that look like me, right? Just gone. And so the purge of black children out of the system has gone, there's been no accountability to the public for that, right? Every parent that kisses their child has the right, if you pay taxes, whether you pay a mortgage or whether you buy a bag of potato chips, you got the right to expect the return on your investment that when your children go into the school in which your tax dollars pay for, that they are prepared to stand on your shoulders. Anything short of that is a betrayal of the public trust. And so for me, and for the Journey for Justice Alliance, I think that, again, having sisters like Elizabeth on the school board is important, because we know what Elizabeth believes in, and we know that she will always be an advocate, for our communities. I think Janice Jackson was one of the more qualified CEOs that we ever had. I knew Janice Jackson when I was a community school coordinator at South Shore, and she was a history teacher, and she ran a debate. She was a phenomenal teacher, right? And so I think there were some things that they did around principal preparation that was important. I think Chicago was a national leader in preparing freshmen to be on track to graduate. And I think that was an important thing, looking at the freshman on track rate, which gives you a sense of what children have the capacity to be. I think the expansion of community schools in the city of Chicago is critical to the future of our neighborhoods, because our schools are going to have to be much more than just test drill places. They're going to have to be spaces of inspiration. And the last thing I say is that for us, education means is inspiration and information that prepare young people to impact society. We have to have a definition of education that guides us, because we're not on the same page. And some people think education is just to prepare you to go get a job, right? But we believe that every teacher must have the opportunity to inspire. Every child must have the opportunity to be inspired. But if you go to a school where you don't have culturally relevant and responsive curriculum, you have no science, you don't have music, if you go to schools like this, where are the opportunities for inspiration? But now see, what I'm talking about is decades of history with that type of culture and no accountability to the public for the absolute failure to those children who our communities trusted the institutions when we send our children to those schools. And so we have to have an honest conversation about, again, this is not to be tinkered, it's got to be transformed. But it can't be transformed if we're not honest, right? So, and I'm also a CPS parent. And I want to be honest with you, I struggled where to send my son. Because the school 2 blocks from my house has over 700 children and 3 black teachers in the entire building. The purge of black teachers from Chicago public schools is some of the most insidious stuff I've ever seen in my life. Once again, no accountability to the public. We've gone from 44% of a teaching force 20 years ago, 2006, to 19% today. 19 to 20%. And it's just like, that's okay, right? And so and we know what research tells us, that children do best when teachers have cultural competency. We know this. So this raises the question on how good are we really doing too, right? When you look at the number of black teachers have diminished, that many of our children are in classrooms with teachers that happen to be young, white, and transient. They leave and they go home, right? So again, I think we have to have honest conversations about public education, what's working, what's not working. But the thing that's most important for us is that we have to have a voice, right? We have to have power, as my brother said.
I'd like to drill down on something you said, G2, but this is a question for it's sort of a jump ball, if you were. If you looked at the program offerings at any number of schools across the city, you'd see a vast difference. There's a difference in funding at schools with parent fundraising. You could look on a lot of different metrics and see some stark differences between schools, often based on where they're situated in the city. If you could sit down tomorrow with the new CEO of Chicago Public Schools who started the job today, what would any of you say about that? What do you do about that? Sorry, jump ball. We'll throw it in the air.
I'll go to the ground and work with the teachers and work with the community members. And I think part of now this is I'll pull from my own research, is out of all of the folks that I spoke with around their trajectory into public life, lowercase d, democratic citizenry, the program offerings were somewhere in the middle between this had an impact or it didn't. It was, did they have a teacher? Did their teachers feel supported? Did they have the relational trust between an elder or an adult to help support their development, their critical engagement with schooling, their environment? Were they nurtured in that way? So I sometimes like to nuance the idea that our community shouldn't have to fight for programming whatsoever. They should always exist there. But that alone isn't going to do it, right? We need to know, and we need to have our teachers and our paraprofessionals being supported and listening to. I'm of the mind, and as a proud alum of 4 different elementary schools and 1 high school, thankfully we stopped moving at that point. No one knows it better than the office clerk, the teachers, and the paraprofessionals, and the young people, and that's the kind of tension around not just bringing people together, but to do what they say once they are together, to really defer to knowledge at the base where it lives, right? Policy, the second it hits the ground, looks a whole lot different than when it looked on a piece of paper. So my advice to Mr. Martinez, I made a really bad joke about the Red Sox pitcher, Pedro Martinez, and no one really laughed that hard. But I'll say, to talk to teachers, there's a history in this city, and we all know it, between large institutions, but that doesn't have to be what we don't have to live in the world as it is. We can be fighting for the world as it should be. And I think that really does start by listening to the folks that are on the ground in ways that this district, quite frankly, has never done.
back and bring somebody into the conversation. I think Catherine is able to join us now. Catherine, are you able to hear us? Okay. Should we keep going? Hey, I can hear you all now. Priority list. But I'm going to ask Elizabeth that since there's a delay, and then maybe we can come back.
I mean, I'd come back to two things I wanted to touch on. I mean, I already talked some about the need for building relational trust. I think we all know that's a major issue. And then I think the other thing that was sort of brought up, the inequities that exist between schools. And that's not a secret. Everybody knows that there are inequities between schools within the district, and I think there have been efforts made to try to address that in a number of different ways, most recently through the process of trying to specifically target both funds in the form of equity grants to offset other forms of losses and to make sure that more programming can be offered, and then also putting other types of programming in schools that have been historically disinvested, using first what was called the equity index and then opportunity index, which again was explicitly trying to incorporate both a sense of where are the communities that have been historically disinvested and how can we make sure we are targeting resources to those places. But I think certainly more can be done, and I will just lift up a couple things that I, as a board member, that I know in talking to the new CEO, I've not spoken with him recently, but just going through this process and looking at his work in San Antonio that I find promising. One of those things is the way that he reimagined the way you calculate and understand poverty. Right now, often it's sort of a general, below what is free and reduced, and that's how poverty is understood. But he really took a deeper dive, and that the folks in that system took a deeper dive to look at what is concentrated poverty, what are the various dynamics that are a part of poverty, and then how do you direct resources to places that need them the most. I think similarly, he attempted socioeconomic integration in San Antonio and said, that in a school district with so many low-income students, there shouldn't be schools that have a majority of students that are not low-income, right? And so I think there are lessons and things that are exciting to me to build on in that work there. I think for my own space, again, where I sit, it comes back to the funding. We talked about funding inequities, right? There are places in the city where you can go where young people are, there can be receiving, let's say, $25,000 per student, per pupil. But the quality of education that is providing them because of the low number of students in that building is not what we think it should be or what they deserve. And we know that we need to do better. But that becomes a difficult proposition when, again, overall, our district is not anywhere near adequacy in terms of what we deserve and should have in terms of funding. And so I think it goes back for me to these funding issues. If we know what we think a quality education looks like and we need to pay for that quality education, then there need to be new sources of revenue. And I think in the pandemic, we've seen short-term federal revenue coming to the district, but you can only do so much with short-term revenue, and part of that revenue is to make up for revenue lost because of the pandemic. What would it look like to have the federal government give long-term funding, something like a new Elementary and Secondary Education Act, federal money, if we know young people have needs that existed before the pandemic and continue now, to make sure that programming and staffing and everything else can continue. That's a different proposition. At the state level, again, I think if we fully funded EBF, the evidence-based funding formula, and did that every year, not just some years. Right now, you want to talk about inequities in Illinois, Chicago Public Schools is the only district in the state of Illinois that pays for their regular pension costs for teacher pensions. There is no other district in this state that does that. And this year, that's to the tune of something like $660 million or so that we're paying that other districts in this state are not paying. That's an inequity that needs to be addressed at the state level. And then certainly there are things I think at the local level that we can do to think about new sources of progressive revenue as well. I think one thing I certainly personally and more as someone in schools was disappointed that the fair tax did not pass here in the state of Illinois. But one thing I think that is promising in the city of Chicago is that it was actually wildly popular, and something like 80% or so of people voted for the fair tax, which is redistribution of wealth, right? Taxation of those with the most money. If we know there's a desire for that at the local level, we should be leveraging that to put forth more progressive policies for taxation. Again, all of these things, if we say, here's what we know every child should have, and I would say to the district's credit, one of the things they're starting to do is putting forth the idea of a high school profile. Every graduate of Chicago Public Schools should, and it's not just academics, right? Social emotional, all the different things that they should experience while in Chicago Public Schools. And then we can back map from that to figure out what it takes to get there. But part of what it takes to get there is fully funded high quality education for those farthest from opportunity. And that's just not something that we've had because of the funding structures that exist, and more broadly because funding for education is based on property taxes and et cetera, et cetera. But I think for me, if we know the end that we want to have, it's about how do we get what we need to provide that.
I don't know if Catherine's able to answer or if we should. Perhaps no? Okay. G2, if you could sit down with Pedro Martinez, what would be the top thing, the thing on his priority list?
So first thing I would guide him to shameless plug, Journey for Justice Alliance's report released in 2018 called Failing Brown v. Board, where we did exactly what you said. We examined course offerings between black, brown, and white schools across the United States. And I actually, just polite pushback to my brother. I do believe that course offerings matter, right? Opportunities for inspiration matter. It's not the only thing that matters, right? But I do think it is of importance. For example, one of the things we discovered in our report was that at Mollison Elementary School there was one teacher aide in the entire building. At Agassiz, which is on Diversity in Ashland, there was a teacher aide in every classroom. At Mollison, they had no world language. At Agassiz, young people had the opportunity to learn Mandarin, Chinese, Arabic, and Spanish, right? What could a child, a black child that actually has a culturally relevant curriculum and has an opportunity to learn Spanish, what can that do to their worldview? Instead of for them understanding that they're not a minority, right? That they're people that look just like them all over the world. So I think really pushing for a real conversation on what equity means, because I applaud the fact that there are equity conversations and there are actually equity departments in the city of Chicago. But it's my belief that equity cannot come from the seats of privilege. The mandates for equity cannot come from the seats of privilege. It has to come from the people closest to the pain who must be closest to the power. So then your advocacy is based on fact and lived experience and not opinion, right? And so I think that piece is important, because even in conversations around equity, I can pretty much assure you that the community-based organizations that I talked to you about, many who have been in our neighborhoods for generations, are not consulted about what these mandates are. So I think really talking with the new CEO around reimagining what equity looks like. And I would also say really, the massive expansion of sustainable community schools in the city of Chicago. There are cities around the United States like Dallas, Texas, Cincinnati, Ohio, where this model works. It has reduced the opportunity gap between black and white children. Graduation rates have organically gone up. So the New York community schools are very well reviewed by institutions like the Learning Policy Institute and Stanford University. Because in the soul of community schools is this belief that we're the leaders that we've been waiting for, and that we actually know what our children need. My sister just said it a few minutes ago. We know what we need in our community, but too often, schools function almost like invader institutions. I know a school in Bronzeville where they have a no parents beyond this point sign at the door. And I can tell you that if you go to many of the parents in our neighborhood and you say, are you welcomed when you walk in the school building? Even though that school gets paid off every child, you will have an overwhelming response of no. So I think the massive expansion of sustainable community schools, where where everybody in the school community contribute to every pillar that supports that school's success. I would definitely, I think that should be, and I would just say that an initiative to put more black teachers in the classroom, whether it's the expansion of models like Grow Your Own Teachers, which was a community-driven model that responded to the district purging black teachers out of the system before they started closing schools. I just spoke with one of my favorite ex-teachers in the world. His name was John Dandridge. He was a teacher at Melville Fuller. He was a math teacher. And before school closings hit, what they did with veteran black teachers was a demand for recertification. So many of these teachers that have been teaching 25, 30 years were now required to go back to school if they wanted to continue teaching. So a lot of them across the city of Chicago retired. And then came Paul Vallis with school probation, and then Arnie Duncan with school closings. And in that process, thousands of teachers that come from our communities were purged out of the system, and they have not been replaced. And so I think that all children need teaching diversity, whether they're black, white, brown, or blue. And to not have that, you send a dangerous message to children. I mean, I'm serious. You send a dangerous message to children, and that is that we are not fit to lead. I'm a product of Chicago public schools. I had white teachers, but I had strong black teachers. I had strong black administrators who gave me an image of somebody who could lead me, that were in positions of leadership. Our children aren't getting that message today. And so I think that those are some things that will be priorities for us.
Mm-hmm. So this is something that's very near and dear and important to me as well, both in terms of my research. I do research on the history of black teachers. Certainly the data that you're talking about is part of that research. I will say that, and it's been a very long 2 years, but it's only been 2 years since I've been on the board. I will say that I have witnessed and been in proximity to work that is happening at the district to try to address this, right? And so a few things I just want to talk about in terms of the pipeline side of things, right? One is that the district has this goal around by 2024 hiring at least 3,000 new Black and Latinx teachers, and we are actually well on our way towards that. And this year, in fact, we had the highest in our incoming teachers and the new teachers hired, the highest rate of, in particular, Latinx teachers that we've had, and a steadying and a beginning to increase of Black teachers as well. Is it enough to undo what's happened in the past? Absolutely not. But I do think there's an effort and desire for change there, and that some of that is partnering. So Grow Your Own is still a partner of the district. And other organizations. I see my colleague over here, Dakota Irby, who is in the at UIC in the Call Me Mister program, right? And leveraging these other kinds of programs, Teach Chicago Tomorrow, the SEED program, partnership with community colleges. And then the other thing that I feel like is a space of promise is our career and technical education pathways. We have more and more pre-teaching CTE programs, and that has expanded every year over the last 3 years. I think there's also more work to be done on the retention side, but I do want to say, I think like there is no question. The logic in the district is that that is important. Now, how we get there and the pace at which we get there, is still a work in progress, but I do think that that is the intention, and something that I've been able to actually have some proximity to and have appreciated.
Glad you pointed that out, and I'm going to open it up to audience questions in just a moment. I just want to finish this thought you brought up, because we started talking tonight about reinvention, and I'd like to close my series of questions with just reinvention, and that's one place is, building that pipeline both with established teachers out there, recruiting them, but also training and talking to students here. That's part of the pipeline effort you're talking about, right? Or in classrooms, when students are still in high school, talking about the teaching profession and how do we particularly speak to Black men about becoming teachers. There's some of the programs I think you're referencing. What are some other programs that are things that are happening that maybe are just a germ or a seed right now, or small scale, that with the right effort, the right funding we've talked about, could become something transformative that either you're seeing in Chicago or maybe G2 outside of Chicago, something that Chicago could take? Go, yes, please.
Yeah, I think in one of the most inspiring experiences I was a part of back in the day, I used to be the education organizer at COCO, and we had a program called Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, which provided youth organizing and youth leadership development opportunities for students in 7 different schools or 7 different neighborhoods throughout the city. There's a similar program in New York called the Student Success Centers. And these where students actually are organized for seniors are organized to mentor freshmen, right? To help provide them with the support and the resources they need. Those are some things that I think are inspirational. I think the success of the community schools in New York is a good example of what's possible and what's needed to like that type of process of gauging from the people in our communities and our teachers and our community residents, using the 6 pillars of sustainable community schools. If you could dream, what would you want for your children, right? I think there's an opportunity to do that right now. And there are the resources available to actually have a transformative impact on our cities. But we cannot go, and actually, in our belief, school is never gonna go back to what it was. I think school has changed permanently, right? We know that we just lost 2 parents at a neighborhood school in the city. We don't know what this Delta variant is gonna do. So what you've seen across the country is actually the reinvention of like the freedom school efforts of the 60s. In Denver, we have members. In New York, we started liberation schools. We had justice schools here in Chicago with COCO. We had, places like New Orleans, Louisiana, where people began to come, Little Rock, Arkansas, where they created freedom school pods in people's homes. There's going to have to be a way to reimagine public education where school may not be where you sit, it might be your experience. As an organizer, I often say that one of the best classrooms I had was on I-90 East, driving one of my mentors to an event he had, and the lessons he shared with me as we were driving. We have to reimagine what public education looks like, because none of us can predict what 2 years from now is going to look like. I mean, over 600,000 people are gone, right? Over 600,000, none of us have lived through this. And we're also going through an investment that none of us have lived through either. The closest I came to it as a young organizer, I want you to understand, I'm not just talking, was an organizer around the Empowerment Zone. And when the Empowerment Zone came, me and Shannon Bennett organized the Youth Futures component of it. And we developed a vision for what youth investment could look like. But at that time, I want to say to my brother, we didn't have the organizing muscle to hold Mayor Daley accountable. So when he stole our idea and turned them into the youth nets, there was nothing we can do about it. But today, we do have the organizing muscle. And we also have the acumen to say that we can determine what these resources look like coming into our communities. We do not have to accept somebody just telling us that this is what you're not going to get the cake, you're going to get the crumbs. If we believe that, Mercy Hospital would be closed. If we believe that, Diet High School would be closed. That's not the cloth I'm cut from. If my belief is that we have the power to transform what our reality looks like. We just got to have a will. And so for me, I think this is really an opportunity to reimagine what public education looks like. And shame on us if we don't do it.
Yes, please.
Sorry, I
And
was
then
just
we'll
gonna
go to
say,
the
and
audience.
I particularly
If you
wanted
can keep
to,
it
I wanted to lift
tight.
this up because I know Catherine wasn't able to join us. And so I did want to talk some about the police-free schools movement, of which the Advancement Project has certainly been a major part, both as a research partner, a policy partner, working with people on the ground. And I think that it's another example in space where you see the power of organizing. And I think there are many things we've talked about organizing, right, that is powerful about organizing, but one of those things is to change the common sense, to change the sense of what is possible. And I think with the police-free schools movement, you've certainly seen that. First, to say it's not a new movement, right? And in fact, you mentioned Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, who are young people. Some of them aren't even young anymore because they started this work 12, 13 years ago, right? And also not just young people. I think of Kofi, who has been, I found a pamphlet in my drawer from Kofi from 2011 talking about police-free schools, right? And certainly, though, I think also accelerated over the course of the last 2 years by the particularly young Black people who came in the streets and demanded this last summer, 2 summers ago now. Ooh, we're moving in time, right? And so I think those things created a context in which it changed people's common sense and ideas around that. Completely, no. We still see these struggles in our communities as well as in our schools. But I know, at least I see in Chicago public schools, the space that it created for the whole school safety process, in which the district partnered with community-based organizations to go around and talk about what does safety mean? What, not just physical safety, emotional safety, mental safety, all types of different senses of what safety is, and then to the point where we actually were able to remove police from quite a number of schools in the district. And that's something that happened, we talk about representative, through local school councils, but the context for that was created by organizing, was created by movement. And then you see the potential, in my mind, for the partnership between institutions and organizers and community-based organizations and lifting up the voices of students in that moment. I feel like that's something that feels to me, again, touching on Catherine's work, but also, you know, the young people who, and older folks, intergenerational groups of organizers who have been arguing for this for quite some time. And I think kind of related to that, I think the other thing that I've seen, again, not just here in Chicago, but nationally, is a real genuine elevating of the need to support young people's mental health, of the importance of addressing social emotional learning as a key part of learning, not as something on the side, not as something extra or for later, but that is a central part of education. And I think, to your point, it is my hope that that's not something that goes back. And I know, like, leading with care, you know, this this fall in CPS, people talk about start with heart, right? Like, how, if you lead with that, how does that transform your relationships? How does that transform the way you relate to children? And to see that embraced at many different levels, both here in Chicago, but I think also nationally, is something that is something coming out of the pandemic that I hope can continue to be built upon.
We're at time, unfortunately, but I want to have each of our panelists just have a quick closing statement, if we could, and then, unfortunately, since we weren't able to ask audience questions, maybe we could chat a minute afterward, after things close, if people have questions for any of the panelists. Castro, could we start with you, perhaps? Closing. Gotta be quick. Sorry.
Yeah, let me solve all of public education right now. No, I'll just point of clarity. What I want to name, which is my priority, I think about policy and practice and program, is my concern is ultimately what it looks like at the ground, right? So just a point here. What I wasn't naming is that programming isn't important. It absolutely is. These are things that our communities shouldn't be fighting over. But that doesn't tell the story of what it looks like in the everyday relationships for young people, right? We can win programming, but ultimately what we can't lose sight of is that when you win programming, you're only winning another campaign. You're only winning more fights for more equitable schools and more equitable education. So I think when I think about public education and what it could look like in the future, I think it is the radical notion that we can have schools without police, right? And that's what leadership at the top would look like. That it wouldn't be passing off decision-making abilities to bodies that have been stripped of their power historically for the last 9, 10 years now. That when we think about educational funding, that we're thinking about it in really radical notions, where we're saying community X has historically had access to friends of organizations. to offset programming and staffing where it doesn't exist. And that's unacceptable, right? But we will have transparency around capital projects. What schools get what where, why they get them there, who was in on conversations that drove them in that way. And that is a radical departure from how we administer and create policy and practice at the ground. So just a point of clarity, I wasn't disagreeing. Just the idea here that what it looks like at the ground is sometimes much more nuanced than just the existence of a space to meet. So.
Yeah, I just think that well, first, thank you for providing this space to the Wieboldt Foundation and to Cassie and Chalkbeat and my esteemed sisters and brothers up here. I think it's always good to talk about, the importance of education and what the future looks like. I would just simply say this, that there's a lot of healing that has to happen in our communities. There's a lot of good trouble that we need to get into to hold districts accountable, because everybody on the school board or in a system does not think like Dr. Breland does. And so I think that is just the fact of the matter, no matter what city you're in. And it's important not to forget what happened yesterday. It's important to remember yesterday so that you can create a value system so that yesterday can't repeat itself. But if we don't remember, so to all of those parents who I used to stand with that cry, I remember a parent from a school called Stagg fainted at a school closing hearing. And they just shipped, this was maybe 2009. They shipped off like she didn't matter. I'll never forget that woman's face as long as I live. Their pain matters. Their stories matter. And for us, it's got to be top of mind. Because if it's not top of mind, then we'll begin to say, well, they don't care about their children or personal responsibility. No, we exist in a system that is carnivorous in relation to us. We're not dealing with people that are just misguided. We're dealing with the wolf. And the wolf does what the wolf does. The wolf covered up what happened to Laquan McDonald. The wolf closed 50 schools in one fell swoop and then threw their hands up when violence exploded in all those neighborhoods. The wolf put liquor stores on every corner in black communities instead of grocery stores. We are dealing with the wolf. And if we don't understand that's what we're dealing with, then we either naive or worse. We part of the problem. So I think we must remember those stories that informs what we do moving forward. So that's what I got to offer.
Thank you. And Elizabeth?
Who wants to talk after G2?
I'm sorry.
I guess I would say, well, again, thank you also. Thank you for inviting me to be here today to the Wieboldt Foundation. It's been a pleasure to be up here with both of y'all. And I look forward to conversation with the rest of you soon. I think a couple things, I guess, just very briefly. I think, one, I remain hopeful. I remain hopeful because I believe in the capacity of young people. I believe in the capacity of our educators and the people who work in the system. I believe in the capacity of our parents and the potential for our communities to move things in a different direction. I also think, as you mentioned, I think it is appropriate for all of us to be held accountable. To do the things that we say we're going to do, and that is a righteous and correct demand of parents. I say that in the current context of short-term things like COVID safety protocols and such, but also the long-term work that needs to continue around really having truly equitable schools, and that the way that we do that is together. It is with, not to, and so that's sort of where I am.
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you to Catherine. Please look at the advancement project. She did really great work. And thank you all. And maybe if the panelists can stick around a few minutes to answer questions.
We do it right. Always on your side. I'm here for you, for what you need, to lend a helping hand when you wake up. Just know that we're always there. And
walk the miles, make the space, take the time, never late. We do it right. Always on your side. 'Cause we do it right. Any place, anytime, we're always there. Rain or shine. 'Cause we do it right. We do it right. Trust the fall, take the lead, and let it set you free. 'Cause when you need someone to trust, we are always there. Set your goals, live your dreams. You can always lean on me. In blue skies are gray, we are always there. And through the fire, through the change, we ain't afraid. Gonna be here every day. We walk the miles, make the space, take the time, never late. We do it right.